Login accepted.
All right. Hello, everybody. I think it's gonna be a little tough for me to follow up on Steven's amazing talk, but uh, I think my title for Tech Symposium was something about software. I don't remember. I wrote that sentence in about 15 seconds and forgot about it. But today's talk is going to be about malware, specifically Windows malware. That's it. Don't have really much more much to say. I like malware. A little introduction into who I am. My name is Dylan. I go by multiple handles. Nigel Gerald. I'm I'm a research engineer at some company that is not really disclosed right now. I graduated last year. I with a CIS major, and uh, before I was working where I was at right now, I was a red team operator with IBM's Express Red under their adversarial simulation team, and I was doing pen testing with them for a while. I did CPTC and CCDC at Cal Poly, and I was also in Swift from 2021 till 24, and I kind of just became a bum my last year. Uh, Personally, for work and for everything, I love Windows. Windows is like my favorite operating system. It's why I have a Mac, and it's also why I did Linux on CCDC. If that tells you anything, you don't really need a referencing Steven's presentation. You guys probably didn't need a picture of my face in my Who Am I slide, so instead I'm putting a picture of my face, but with it of a picture when I had very poor bandwidth because I think it's beautiful. Um, Moving into the actual table of contents. I wanted to cover four things today. I have no idea if I'm going to be able to cover them in time. I put way too many slides. I want to start off with a primer on malware, Windows malware, then go into the sort of malware infection. So talking more so, how is malware actually getting onto your system, um, and onto whatever device you own. This is probably that would probably be the most important part of this talk, and that was the biggest inspiration for the talk that I had, which spawned all these other things. Then following that, we're going to be covering malware capabilities. So really, what is malware doing? That personally is the most fun part for me, as that's my primarily what I do for work is writing malware and developing new capabilities that based off of what I see in the public or um, just random things that I think of at 3 a.m. And then tying it all together at the end, we're going to be going over a sort of malware attack that happened a year or two ago on someone in the Swift Discord. Also, partially inspiration for this talk. Um, so, getting started with a sort of primer on malware. I wanted to go over the sort of malware taxonomy. I think this is something a lot of us are familiar with. You got your viruses, they hide in your programs. You got worms, they worm around and go everywhere. You have Trojans, which are fake software, and backdoors, which I think are self-explanatory. I think everyone's heard this like multiple times in their life, or if they taken any sort of computer literacy course. Quite frankly, I hate these definitions. I think they suck. I think they're completely outdated. And whenever someone talks about these, I just like I get that urge where I was like, I really want to enter the discussion, but I don't want to be rude. This was one of the primary inspirations for this talk, and the reason why I think these are terrible is because, one, they're outdated, and they sort of imply that when you classify malware, these sort of classifications are a bit mutually exclusive for each other. I strictly recall multiple times overhearing discussions where people say, "Oh, there is this sort of malware out there. It's a virus." And then someone says, actually, no, it's more of a Trojan because of this. And being someone who develops malware professionally and all that for a while now, it's it's not that sort of binary. There's a lot more nuance to sort of describing and understanding malware. So before we can get into that, I think we have to sort of understand like what malware is as a sort of definition, right? Malware being malicious software. This is anything on your computer that does stuff you might not really intended or expected, right? Um, it's a lot of this can be sort of seen through how you want to frame your software. For example, if I have a sensitive passwords.txt file because I don't want to use a password file or password manager, right? And I decide to write a program to encrypt that file with a password that only I know. Did I create a program that does that, or did I create something that is ransomware? Because it could be used either ways, right? Um, Malware is really just sort of understanding that software, everything, it's all software at the end of the day. It's sort of how it's being used that we need to sort of understand. And because it's all software, we should take some time to understand how does software actually run on your computer. And when I say your computer, I don't mean this one, I mean a Windows computer. So you have two sort of main classifications. You have compiled programs and you have scripts, right? Compiled programs, you write code, you hit the build button on your developer environment, and now you have an executable, right? When this executable runs, the operating system does some magic to turn it into a process. This involves allocating resources and then loading other dependencies it has in the form of DLLs, which are sort of basically shared code that isn't directly in the executable, but referenced and used by the executable. And then you also have scripts. Scripts, I think a lot of people are more familiar with because they're sort of the more human readable. These are run through a program called an interpreter. These interpreters are usually also compiled programs. Being human readable, they're a little easier to work with, to write and to read. The reason why we want to sort of understand this is because when it comes to the sort of infection side of malware, uh, it use malware either comes in these forms or uses and subverts some forms of how these programs actually run. This will make more sense when I actually go into that side of things, which is happening right now. Now we're moving into the malware infections side of stuff. This isn't an exhaustive list of how malware gets on your system. I think these are more popular ways in the sense that from public threat intel reports, from personal anecdotes of people being compromised, and for what I use for work, right? These are the relatively more common and known ways of how malware infects your system. So these are the ones I wanted to cover, but there are definitely more. There's a million and one ways to do things. So the first sort of way you can get infected is through something called an unsigned program. Uh, Basically, programs on your computer can have a sort of digital signature on them, right? When you sort of right click and go to the properties on Windows, you get to see this sort of view. And if it's signed, or if you want to run a PowerShell command, you can see that it has a digital signature. All you really need to understand is it says it's okay. There is a sort of cryptographic process and math and public private key stuff is involved that I don't want to get into. But if it says the signature is okay, you can have a relatively high degree of confidence that this program is what it says it is, right? By default, programs are not signed. This is because these code signing certificates that are used to sign these programs actually cost money and aren't easy to necessarily get access to. What this means is if you have an unsigned program, you can't really say with high fidelity that it is what it claims to be, right? This is what can get a lot of people. Uh, Within the sort of compiled program chain, this is literally sits at the top. This is just a malicious file. Not all unsigned programs are malicious, but if you're downloading something that you think, or if you're downloading some official software and it's not signed, you might want to be a little careful because it might not be what it says it is, right? So here's an example of 3 unsigned programs, right? Uh, Desmume is an emulator for DS games. It is unsigned. It doesn't have a signature. Now, is it malicious? It's not. This is something I use personally to play games and stuff in the past, right? But because it's unsigned, it can be a little difficult to tell if I have an actual copy or if I have a sort of backdoor or something just distributed with the same logo and same name. Smart Screen will also tell you if you download an executable, right? And it's published by an unknown publisher. I know, like a lot of times when I download something and I run, I kind of just skip right through this, but it is worth taking a look into if you're downloading some official software, right? And the publisher is unknown. You might want to think, where did I get this from, right? Did I source this from the actual vendor, or am I running, am I getting a sort of backdoored or just straight up malicious file on my system? Likewise, when you run a file that is unsigned, Windows will generally give you a warning and will completely just say it doesn't have a signature. We don't know if this is what it's saying it is. Putting this into practice for malware, let's say I got Minecraft, right? The actual signed copy of Minecraft, right? I can modify that file, but if I do, that breaks the digital signature. The digital signature is no longer there. So using a kind of old and not really working as well tool for a proof of concept purposes called Backdoor Factory, right? I took the actual copy of the Minecraft launcher and I backdoored it with stuff that would give me remote access to the computer that the backdoor runs on, right? So now we have the backdoored Minecraft launcher. The signature is no longer valid. It looks like Minecraft. If I didn't name it Minecraft backdoor and it just had this icon, if you didn't take a look for signatures or anything, it would look like a legitimate copy of Minecraft. And this is how a lot of people sort of get compromises because they download programs, they don't check where they downloaded from, and they look sort of unassuming, right? I think of all the classifications in the original taxonomy, this sort of falls under the sort of Trojan classification. And then when I run it, I have remote access of my computer through this little terminal I have on the bottom left. Please have an antivirus because antivirus, despite what everyone says, it actually can catch stuff, and it did catch this. I had to put an exception, so I wouldn't have to deal with this for the lab purposes. Next set of really common ways that people sort of distribute and package malwares through something called a DLL sideload. So as I covered previously, DLLs are sort of these shared libraries of code that your program may load in because your programs aren't always all encompassing, right? You don't want to reinvent the wheel, so sometimes someone else has the code package and your program wants to just use that code rather than re-implementing it, which is what DLLs are there for. Right, dynamic link libraries. So in Windows, many programs are shipped with the DLLs that they depend on. So for example, Discord, you can see there's a bunch of DLLs down over here, right? Now, during the way programs are run by the operating system, there's a DLL loading process, right? Windows takes a look at the program and sees where are the DLLs this thing is pulling code from, right? The way Windows looks for the DLLs, it's kind of stupid, right? And makes it very easy to sort of weaponize and sneak in your malware, right? So putting this into practice, right? Let's say going back to Minecraft, I have a legit copy of Minecraft, right? It has the digital signature, right? This is, for all intents and purposes, a perfectly valid copy of the Minecraft launcher, right? If I was just looking at this, it was like, wow, Minecraft, good to go, right? Unfortunately, the Minecraft or the way Windows loads DLLs, it will look in the current folder. It will put a priority on the current folder that a program resides in when it comes to looking for what to load in, right? So yes, this is a valid copy of Minecraft. Those are some malicious DLLs that contain malware that I have put right next to Minecraft, right? And the Minecraft launcher depends upon those DLLs by name. So it just sees that it's there and it's going to load it, and indirectly, which is going to cause it to load my malware when Minecraft runs. So when I open up Minecraft, it looks like it's a legit copy of Minecraft. Minecraft's there. My antivirus and stuff is on, and I have remote access to this system through the Minecraft program, and I could do whatever I want on there. Another way that malware seems to find ways to hop onto people's system is through script execution. Scripts, a lot of times, so scripts, the most common ones on Windows are going to be your command or your PowerShell. These are run, most average end users don't really use these all too much. If anything, they'll go to a site that has some install directions and say, okay, just copy and paste this, open your terminal, paste it in, run it, right? And that is one way that people can get to, because obviously, if you don't know what you're running, you can run something malicious. Surprise, surprise, right? Um, this is a legit GitHub repository to something about activating Windows, something about cracking it, right, and all that. It has very simple installation steps, right? You just copy and paste this into your PowerShell, and then it runs, and you crack your Windows or something like that. And I mean, it's legit. I think I forgot. But it is sort of like this sanitization to simple things like this, where people think, okay, I'm just gonna run stuff on my computer and it's gonna do the thing. Obviously, it's going to then be really easy to sneak in a malicious script into whatever you're doing. There has been a sort of recent phishing campaign, I think within the past year or so, I forgot, called ClickFix, where they it uses script execution to get access to your computer, right? The way it goes about it isn't like super there's different ways it goes about it. So in this particular screenshot, they tell you for like sometimes it comes in the form of a captcha or like some sort of troubleshooting steps on a phishing page that you get redirected to, right? They'll tell you, oh, um copy this text, put it into PowerShell, or press your home button, paste it, hit enter, and your thing is going to be fixed. Taking a look at what that is actually running, it runs encoded PowerShell commands that end up downloading and installing malware on your computer. Scripts don't always come from being pasted by the individual, though. Sometimes they can come in, well, different ways, shapes, and forms. In this example, there was a sort of Minecraft modded client, or I don't even know. I forgot how I ran into this one. But this repository was advertised as like some sort of Minecraft mod, and you just sort of install it and you download it, move it somewhere, and it just works. Or there was like a script that you would double click. What it actually did was in the back end, they brought their own script interpreter with a malicious script hidden alongside of it, and then it would run it. The malicious script being encoded and being completely unreadable unless you could deobfuscate this, which I'm not good at, but there's definitely software to do that. I'm not a reverse engineer, so I just looked at this and said, wow, that sucks. Um, and then last of these sort of ways to get infected that I want to cover today are zero clicks. These ones are a lot harder to deal with because it's in their name, zero clicks. You don't do anything and you got infected. Cry about it, right? Um, I don't really have any advice I could say about this one because up until now, there's been some pretty common line of advice of don't run random things and be careful what you're downloading and be careful what you're running, right? As everyone says, I just wanted to explain, why that was the case. Zero clicks are sort of different. They kind of happen without your control. You can't really change too much of how you sort of navigate or use your computer to avoid them. At that point, you just kind of have to hope that you're not the target, or uh your antivirus is really good, but if they're doing a zero click, and good luck. The two zero clicks I wanted to cover were supply chain attacks, and I wanted to talk about browser exploits. These ones are much less common. Supply chain attacks usually come. This is a horrible, horrible oversimplification, but the idea is there's some sort of software distribution platform. It might be the GitHub repository for a library used by other programs, or it might be the download link for a program, right? Whatever the case is, where that platform that software is hosted on has been compromised. So when people try to download things, they end up downloading something else, right? And because you thought you downloaded from the right source, now you've been compromised. Sucks. The lot more complicated one is browser exploits, and these ones are a lot less common because browsers have gotten better these days, but there are still a subset of people who use them, but generally they target very specific people. And not millions to my understanding anyways. Browser exploits being an exploit in your browser. When you browse to a site or an attacker controlled malicious site that contains the exploit, your browser just, as an over simplification, your browser becomes exploited and runs malicious code on it. It is very difficult to sort of defend against this because this is sort of the nightmare situation where most of the times when you come to a malicious link, you still have to do additional steps to actually get compromised. As I was saying before, you got to download a program, you got to copy and paste some text into your terminal, you got to do something. When it comes to a browser exploit, you just kind of you might like go to the site or something, and then it's just kind of over, which sucks. For an example of a zero click, this one actually happened really recently, a few months back, and it was happening over a longer period of time. There was a supply chain attack on Notepad++. Um, this one affected me, I think. I don't know. I haven't checked my version. I probably should. The site hosting the Notepad++ executables where they get distributed got compromised, so they ended up when I forgot if it was when you were downloading Notepad plus plus or when Notepad plus plus was automatically pulling for updates on itself. But in one of those two situations, it was pulling in malicious code that would then get loaded or ran when you ran Notepad, right? You wouldn't know this because you went to either A, you went to the legit site of Notepad plus plus, or B, you got a regularly scheduled update. Um, but in the end, that is what pulled in malware into your system. This is a zero click because you didn't really like do anything wrong per se. They compromised something kind of out of your control. So wrapping all this sort of malware infections side stuff together, what I wanted to talk about and why I think this was the most important part of this talk was just how this relates to individual personal security. I'm not going into privacy about your data and using VPNs and all that because I'm the last person you should talk about that. I'm pretty sure my social security number is on like 15 different forums and like 30 Discord servers right now. So so I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about security and not running stuff on your computer, right? Because I think these are some very common questions that I hear people ask or get discussed around, right? Where people say, if you click a link, you get hacked. It's like not wrong, right? Because zero clicks exist. Okay, I guess that's a bit counterintuitive, but it's not exactly wrong because there is a slight possibility, but it's like very unlikely. But for the most part, clicking a link will not get you malware. It will not get you compromised, right? You have to do additional things. You have to, whether it be if you click a link and you go to a malicious site, you have to now send in additional information, right? Such as your login information, or relating back to malware, if you're clicking a malicious link and it downloads a program, you actually have to run it now. Or if it tells you to run something, you have to follow its instructions. Clicking one link isn't going to make your computer explode, and for the most 99.99% of the time, it's not going to make your computer explode, and you don't need to reimage your whole system. I mean, you could if you really wanted to, but this is just transparency as someone who does this stuff professionally and has been victim to it and has seen other victims who like there's usually extra steps involved. Then moving into how did I get malware on the system? It's because you downloaded something. You followed some instruction that you shouldn't have, right? That's really it. It's not some sort of mysterious black box where it's just the computer just became evil one day and now I have to reimage it. And then moving into the last one, how can you protect yourself from malware? For the most part, be proactive, right? Uh, if you if you're downloading software, make sure what you're downloading is what you're intending to download, right? There are ways to verify its sort of authenticity. There are I didn't cover this, but there are sites you can upload it to sort of get a vibe check, although those are a little mixed because any good malware can evade most of those sort of classifications. And so avoid running things, be careful, like understand whenever you download something or whenever you are given instructions to basically make modifications to your computer, put don't blindly follow them. Try take some time to understand what is this really doing, right? It could be a quick Google search, or it could be quick look at the program or the script that they're telling you to run, and it will, and you might want to think to yourself, hey, if this is the Minecraft installer, should it really be like 400 gigabytes, or should it be signed? Probably, and things of that nature. Now moving into the a little more on the technical side of stuff, I want to be talking about malware capabilities, because up until now I've talked about how does stuff get on your system, right? I didn't really say anything about what it does, right? And that's a whole nother thing, and another part of why I hate the malware taxonomy is because um it doesn't really it tries to bundle everything from infection to capabilities into one, right? But I like to think of the way malware gets on your system and what malware is actually capable of doing, as they're pretty two separate things with sometimes a little bit of overlap. So up until now, we've talked about, okay, now we have stuff running on our system. What does that mean for us, right? Well, it's pretty terrible, honestly, but I want to cover like sort of four primary capabilities that are implemented across many malware that targets normal people, as for lack of better words. So when people sort of make malware and sort of distribute it online to compromise people, these are the sort of capabilities that I see most commonly. Depending on the target audience of the malware, they're going to have different capabilities. If they're targeting certain people at certain workplaces, they're going to try to make it a lot more stealthier, and the capabilities are going to be a lot different than just sort of malware that's expected to run across hundreds and thousands of people, and try to just grabbing things off of that. So the four capabilities I'm going to cover are command and control, information exfiltration, persistence, and in-memory execution. A lot of these capabilities are not mutually exclusive with each other, and a lot of these capabilities can be associated with things from the malware taxonomy, which is annoying. So moving into command and control. This is often abbreviated to C2 or CNC, right? It is basically how malware communicates with the person who is responsible for it being on your system, right? Uh, through command and control, this is how they get control of your computer, which means running programs, changing what do you call it? Changing files, uploading or downloading things. This is all done through command and control. The command and control being the concept that malware communicates with some sort of server. The way it does that is there's 101 different ways that malware can achieve command and control. One of the most common ones is through web requests, right? Uh, so what happens is the malware will send a web request, sort of like when you are in your browser and you access a site. It will send a web request to the server that controls the malware. And in that web request, it will encode data that will basically say, hey, give me some instructions. And the server will, which is controlled and accessed by the person who put it on your system, will respond with something such as, show me what files are on there, or turn his computer off, or I don't know, do something, right? And the malware receives those instructions, and then it'll just run that task on the computer, right? For example, this is a open source malware called the Havoc framework, and in my server on the bottom down over here, I wrote a command to run I instructed the malware to run the who am I command, right? And I could see I received the output on the bottom right here, and it's like a little truncated. The way that communication actually ends up looking over the wire, though, it occurred over the form of a web request. The web request is like basically unreadable. It's encrypted among many other things, but it is this idea that when malware has a sort of network connectivity to a server, it can communicate with it in any way, shape, and form to receive and send instructions, and not just instructions, but data in general. Instructions being can be a form of data, right? So over here, this is done through web requests, but it's not always just done through web requests, right? As I was saying, as long as you can sort of communicate in any way, shape, or form, you can send and receive data, you can send and receive instructions. So this was another example done over Reddit, right? Within Reddit is like a sort of forum thingy-majiggy. I forgot how to describe it. So you can send comments and you can read comments, right? Comments contain text that can be used as a form of data storage, right? So the malware can create and read comments on a Reddit post, and through that, the server can sort of control the malware and instruct it on what to do, right? Another protocol is DNS. DNS being how your computer is going to resolve a name to a website. It can transfer data through those names through that lookup process. I don't want to get too much into that though. So command and control is a capability that we spoke of, but it's still a bit of an abstract capability because all it really says is do things. We haven't really still covered what things the malware can do though, right? So this one is actually something a lot of malware targeting consumers and normal people will do. Information exfiltration. Another word for malware that implements its capabilities as its primary purpose are info stealers. And the idea is they run this malware to steal information from your system, right? It might be something that the malware does, like the moment you run it, it grabs all your information and then that's all it does. Or it can be achieved through command and control, where after the malware is running on your system, it uses command and control to instruct the malware to read data off of your system and then shuttle it over through that command and control communication channel. In Windows in particular, a lot of how you a lot of your authentication information for browsers and applications is stored on the file system and it's encrypted. Sort of. Well, yes. Now, and because once you have malware on your system running on your system, it can just read that and upload it somewhere, transfer it over C2, as I said, right? Um, it doesn't help that the encryption system that Windows has by default that most programs will use is sort of easy to circumvent, which basically means like once malware is able to sort of exfiltrate this information, uh, kind of sucks for you, right? You might want to change all your passwords, or if they haven't already locked you out of your accounts, right? Should have had 2FA or multi-factor authentication. And then another capability is persistence. So programs, when a program is done running, that's sort of it, right? Like if you go to Task Manager and you turn off your program, if you turn off your computer, the programs whatever was running is no longer running, right? So malware needs to find ways to persist and stay running on your computer, right? This is why I love Windows because there's a million ways for any sort, not malware, but just any program in general to activate itself upon startup or other sort of triggers, right? So you have registry keys that can dictate what programs are going to start when you turn on your computer or when you log on. You have Windows services that will start on startup, or scheduled tasks, which can run on a regular cycle or on startup, right? Uh, this sort of capability is a lot more aligned with the sort of definition of a backdoor, but once again, it's not mutually exclusive. A malware that implements command and control and info stealing can also persist on your computer. These are all just sort of features of the malware that whoever programmed it decides to put into it. And the last capability I wanted to cover is in-memory execution. Uh, this is a bit of a bit of a complex topic, but the idea is a process on your computer is just an instance of the program running, right? You double click the program, now there's a process running, right? So if you can sort of simulate or emulate that whole process of going from program to running process, you can run a program within another program. In other words, you running a process within a process, right? This is called in-memory execution. There are various reasons why you want to do this. Is mainly why malware would want to do this is because it's stealthier, right? If you don't have all the malware on your file system, it's a lot harder to find it, to get rid of it, and to sort of understand what it does. If it's living in somewhere more harder to access, in this case, your RAM, right? One way that you could sort of think about this, as sort of like, I guess, an analogy is like mods for a game. I don't know, like Minecraft mods or for a Steam game, right? When you download a mod, you have these sort of program files that get loaded by whatever game you're playing, right? You have these sort of programs and assets that get loaded by the game you're playing, and the game is now running differently because it's loaded all this stuff in there, right? Um, Malware, that's sort of what malware can do with in-memory execution, except rather than having these compiled programs and different assets to change its behavior on your file system, it will just kind of grab them over like command and control or something else. So a very big example of this one is Meterpreter. Meterpreter is an open source malware, a part of the Metasploit framework. It was written like 20 something years ago, but the design decisions and the architecture that went into it have basically been copy and pasted for nearly every single commercial and actual malicious malware for, I don't know, like the past 20 years. So it's a really good resource to learn from. So the core payload comes in the form of a DLL. That part is not super important, right? But the part that is important is the fact that the core interpreter payload doesn't really do a lot except C2 or command and control, right? All it does is communicate with the interpreter server. It can't really do too much on its own. However, all the additional parts of interpreter, all the interesting parts that someone who actually wants to screw up your computer, those capabilities that they'd be interested in are implemented in other extensions of Interpreter, which are additional DLLs, right? Most notably are the standard API, which contains situational awareness, key logging, screenshot capabilities, and Kiwi, which uses is a port of Mimikatz, a open source software to grab all the passwords and credentials on your Windows computer. The way Meterpreter goes about this sort of process is it's all done through C2, right? The Meterpreter, when an attacker connects to the Meterpreter server, it will issue a command, right? And as we sort of covered, commands are communicated through C2. Meterpreter sees that command coming in, sees that task and says, okay, I need to load in this sort of extension, right? And when we send in the command, the server is also going to send in that extension, right? That additional DLL that contains the additional capabilities, right? It's going to send all that through the C2 channel. So now Meterpreter is now going to load in these additional modules and be running them within its same running process. So this way, Meterpreter, the core itself, not very capable. There's not a whole lot going on with it. But now it has additional features that when you look at the file on disk, right, on your file system, you don't see those capabilities because they aren't there. The actions and its capabilities are sort of invisible to your file system. So an example of this sort of going on, right, is I run the sort of interpreter program, right, on my computer, and I have my own server to sort of catch that command. I have my own command and control server to catch that connection from interpreter, right? See that over here on this second box. Then I send a command to the server to load the standard API. The server is then going to communicate that to the interpreter malware the next time it sort of checks in with my server. That's going to allow me to run things such as key logging, right? So then in my browser, I go over to roblox.com, right? So I have to open my browser and I have to type in the link, right? And when I start the key scan, I can see it captures all of those keystrokes, right? And then I stop the key scan. In this way, malware can do a whole lot on your system because when you have access to your operating system, you basically have the same level of access of any software has. Software can go to the web, right? Your browser goes to the web. Video conferencing software that you can turn on your camera, you can turn on your microphone, right? malware being regular software, thus can do all of that. It doesn't help that by us having the capability of in-memory execution, we can do all of that while having like minimal trace and evidence on the compromised computer. So wrapping this all together, right? When we talked about malware, we talked about two parts. We talked about the infection angle, and we talked about the capability angle, right? Uh, and because there's these sort of two different sides, right? Like how the malware got how to classify the malware based on how it ran in your system versus what it can do. I think it's a lot easier, and I'm more of a fan. And what I see is more common is to classify malware through what the intent of the malware was to do, right? If the primary intent of the malware was to steal information, we usually call it something along the lines of like an info stealer, right? But that doesn't mean that it can't command and control, right? It doesn't mean it can't do persistence. It's just that's the primary function of the malware was to just grab someone's information. And this goes along with the other lines of like remote access Trojans, rootkits, and spyware. So let's see. Okay, still have a little bit of time. So wrapping this all together, I want to try to grab all this information to sort of understanding a sort of malware attack with a family that has been sort of classified as the Hexon stealer. So about a year and a half ago in the Swift Discord, someone said that they got malware on the computer. I was like, wow, that sucks, right? But it was like 1 something a.m. and I was curious, right? So and they were up for some reason, so they entertained my questions, and I said, "Where'd you get it from?" Right? And then they put the link, and here's a site. It's a pretty legit looking site. Apparently, it's like an actual game, but like with a different name and all that stuff. There's a download link. The download link is actually something on the Discord CDN. That's the first sign of something's a little weird. Usually when people host their software and stuff, they have more official file hosting sites to go from. The Discord CDN is where all your files go when you randomly upload something. So this is already a bit strange. But once again, when you download this, nothing happens, right? All you did was download a file. It's not going to do anything unless you run it. But that guy ran it. Uh, right. And I ran it too because I wanted to know what it did. Unfortunately, I didn't have screenshots of that. So this is actually from like a sandbox thing called any.run. When you extract the RAR, a RAR being of like an archive file format, kind of like a zip file, there's this World Wars beta setup 1.exe. Once again, nothing nothing bad is going to happen to my computer until I actually run it, right? And then when I do run it, it says that it's installing and doing some stuff. And from this point, I don't really have screenshots, but what do you call it? The malware is running on the system. And what I remember that person saying is like they got locked, they got kicked out of all their Discord stuff. Um, and then they got scared because they got kicked out. I mean, it makes sense if I got randomly logged out of Discord. I'd be thinking, what the heck? There's probably some other stuff, but I honestly forgot. That was the only part I remember. um, now trying to sort of figure understand the whole point of this talk is to sort of understand malware more, right? So we're gonna go into trying to understand what this thing was capable of, how it did what it did, and not just bad program, I lost Discord, right? So taking a little further step into it, investigating that executable in the RAR, right? It's actually a sort of it got identified luckily by Windows as a sort of archive file format. It was actually something called NSIS. Forgot what that stands for. It's something install script something, right? Uh, but all this tells us is like, even though this is an executable program, it also serves as an archived file format, kind of like a zip. So honestly, it's like a zip in a zip, right? And within it are all these other additional files and applications, right? In particular, interesting was all this executable that was within this other executable, right? This World Wars beta, which was the actual malware. Um, from personal experience, I can recognize that this sort of file system is something called this is a file system of an Electron application, right? Electron being a sort of software suite that people use to convert website applications into desktop applications, right? They all, for some reason, look like this, right? a very interesting feature of them is they have a backend scripting engine called Node.js, right? They use Node.js, which is JavaScript that runs on your system and also has operating system access. So it's very juicy for malware authors, right? So what we can understand so far is this quote unquote game that they downloaded was actually this game installer that they installed was actually an Electron application. It was actually a browser application, sort of like a browser application, right? Very strange. But going back to what I said earlier, Electron runs Node.js. Node.js scripts have operating system access. So investigating the folders within this malware some more, Electron has its own sort of way it works, but one of the things it has is called an ASAR, which is another archive file format, which contains additional resources that are used by the Electron application. In this case, we have evil JavaScript files and other plugins. Looking into the plugins that has in the Node modules, there's some C++ code that gets run through JavaScript because Node.js has underlying access to the operating system. In this case, the C++ code that's running is used to decrypt encrypted files that use Windows default cryptography, which is why I was saying earlier, the Windows cryptography is like while your authentication stuff is encrypted on the file system in Windows by default, it's not the greatest because it's very easy to decrypt it. If you have operating system code level access, you could just run the decryption function and it gets decrypted and boom, sucks for you, right? All your stuff is now like perfectly readable and usable by whoever stole them. As for this Node.js script that was run by the Electron application, this contained most of the evil stuff that this malware was doing. I don't have a screenshot of when I decrypted it, or well, tried to decrypt it, or decode it. But this is what it looked like. It looked terrible to read, and it like hurt my feelings, so I didn't want to look at it anymore. But what I do remember is seeing things along the lines like it would grab your Minecraft related stuff, Growtopia for some reason, Discord, browser, grab all your browser stuff, credit cards that were saved in the browser and all that. Please don't save your credit cards in your browser. That's a bad idea, specifically for this reason. And then on top of so far what we can see is it's an info stealer, right? It grabbed the Discord token, it grabbed your credit card stuff and whatever I just said. But on top of that, it also installs persistence. I actually did have a screenshot of this, but I also so what it did is after you would run it, it would write a script to your startup folder. And then that way, whenever you whenever you turn on your computer and you logged on, that script would run. And what that script was running was some executable. It was a script interpreter for Node.js, and I believe it was passing an additional script to rerun the malware, do something. I kind of forgot at this point. On top of that, this on top of running Node.js, this thing also this thing was designed so weirdly. It would bring compiled source code and drop it onto your file system and then compile it and run it on your file system at the same time. In this particular one, this capability was used to take screenshots. What do you call it? This malware had a screen share feature, and it did this through dropping the source code to a program that would take a screenshot, compiling and running that program, and then sending the screenshots over command and control, which is a really dumb design, but like I mean it works, right? I'll show that in a few slides. And then as for the way it did command and control, it did this through WebSockets, which is similar to HTTPS. So I noticed that after I ran the malware, I took a look at Wireshark. I was connecting out to some random IP address, and then I went to that IP address, and I found there was a user panel. I was like, oh, this is probably like how they log in and control my system then, right? I didn't know where the key was, but I ended up opening the memory of the malware process and finding various things that looked like they would be keys. And after I plugged it in, I was like, oh, I have control over my own computer now. That's awesome, right? And then I sent it over to my friend and he started playing music on it. And then yeah, so like what I was talking about earlier about this like streaming feature, right? It was that really weird, like they take a million screenshots per second into my temp folder and then they like upload it and send it to themselves. Like, dude, this sucks. This is like such a stupid design. But it was funny, right? So I saw all this, like you could play music, you could start a stream, you could run commands, you could make message boxes pop up. I was like, this is really cool. Um, I think like this malware, the infrastructure was set up. I don't think anyone was using it because like I kind of observed it for a few days and no one was going on it. I think this was on one of my laptops. I I don't treat my laptops very well. But yeah, and then doing some more research, I saw like all these other features. Like yeah, you could apparently chat with the target, which I think is really funny. Play music, control panel, do all this stuff. I was like, wow, this is really neat. And then my friend was also just controlling my stuff for a while. And then as for the actual, but at the end of the day, it's called Hexon Stealer because its primary purpose, what that people sort of identify is because it steals information, right? So digging more into memory, I was trying to take a look at, well, what information was it stealing? And then I found that it was sending data into a Go file link that no longer works, unfortunately, and I'm too lazy to rerun the malware, right? But I took a look at it. I was like, I was talking to this guy. First, I was like, okay, yeah, this looks like it's just command and control. Oh, actually, wait, it looks like yeah, it stole your Discord token. Oh, and your browser passwords. Also, yeah, your cookies, your credit card. Actually, yeah, it took everything. You might want to be careful. You might want to investigate all that now, because well, I went to the Go file link that I uploaded from my own stuff. I saw that I dropped the cards.txt file onto my file system. I didn't have any credit cards. So it was empty. But I took a look at all that and I just saw a folder saying, here's credit cards, here's passwords, here's Discord. I'm like, that's awesome. Well, if you wanted to know what you lost, this is what you lost, I guess, right? Oh well. And yeah, that covers it for this talk.